We're with you this morning for an ITV News special programme on the situation in Ukraine after Kyiv saw its heaviest night of bombardment so far. Among the targets, an oil refinery only a few miles outside the capital, which was hit by Russian missiles. But there's been no major advance on Kyiv. The city is currently under a strict curfew, so many residents have heeded government advice to spend the night sheltering underground in metro stations and basements. Kharkiv in the east has come under sustained attack, where Russian troops have entered Ukraine's second city. As well as our teams in Ukraine, will also be in Poland as families who within a matter of days have become refugees flee to safety, leaving everything behind.
How are you feeling today about what is happening to your country, what is happening to your family?
I'm scared.
And we'll have more on the moves the US, UK and EU made last night, agreeing major new financial sanctions, cutting off a number of Russian banks from the SWIFT global payments system. Plus, there's confusion here over the future of Chelsea, as Roman Abramovich says he's handing over stewardship of the club. Well, this is the capital, Kyiv, this morning. Sunrise was not that long ago, and the beauty of the city, as you can see in the morning sunlight, belies what came last night, a third and heaviest night of bombardment so far. Heavy artillery fire rained down on this city, and bombing was reported in the country's northeast, while an oil refinery outside the capital was hit by Russian missiles. But there's still fierce resistance from Ukrainian troops and civilians, while stronger financial penalties have been brought against the Russian government in an attempt to cripple President Putin's war machines, while Germany and Australia have offered more military support. Well, Robert Pessin will talk us through all of that in a few minutes. But our various teams in Ukraine, Moscow, Washington and Poland will be joining us throughout this programme, as well, of course, Ukrainians who, in a matter of days, have seen their lives turned upside down. First, though, to John Ray.
Ukraine has survived another night of torment, another night of terror. This is said to be a fuel depot, ablaze to the south of Kyiv, as Russia targets the country's vital infrastructure and is met by defiance. In this social media post, the local mayor says the enemy wants to destroy everything, but it will achieve nothing. God is with us. Under cover of darkness, a column of tanks headed towards Kharkiv, Ukraine's second city. Vladimir Putin has staked his reputation on a war he must now win, and win, some fear, at any cost. So he's unleashed his feared Chechen allies, who recorded themselves apparently seizing a Ukrainian base, then raising their own flag. In response, the West has agreed its toughest sanctions yet to exclude some, though not all, Russian banks from the SWIFT financial system.
As Russian forces unleash their assault on Kiev and other Ukrainian cities, we are resolved to continue imposing massive costs on Russia. Costs that will further isolate Russia from the international financial system and our economies.
The Ukrainian military is reinforced by a citizens' army. With great bravery, some place themselves in the path of Russian tanks, while in the eastern city of Sumy, a petrol bomb was hurled at a Russian convoy. But the invading forces have also faced sophisticated anti-tank weapons supplied by NATO powers. And though there will be no UK troops on the ground, these missiles are made in Northern Ireland, now seen in the hands of Ukrainian soldiers.
The horror of what is unfolding in Ukraine is becoming clear to Western audiences, and that is in turn putting huge pressure on Western politicians. We've got to act together, and we've got to do more.
As Russia's assault intensifies, so its international isolation deepens. Last week, Donald Trump flattered Putin. Last night, he praised the Ukrainian president.
He's a brave man. He's hanging in. He's a brave man.
Prince Harry has added his voice to the wave of revulsion at Russian aggression.
Before I begin, we would like to acknowledge the people of Ukraine who urgently need our continued support as a global community.
The United Nations says at least 240 civilians have been killed or injured for a fourth consecutive night in Kiev. The safest place to shelter was in the underground railway station. John Ray, ITV News.
Well, we are going to go live to Rohit Kachu in Ukraine in just a moment, but let's take a look at the latest developments as they stand. Overnight, huge explosions lit up the sky south of the capital Kyiv, where people hungered down in homes, underground garages and subway stations in anticipation of a full-scale assault by Russian forces. Flames billowed into the air before dawn from an oil depot near the Zuliani airport, about 25 miles, that's about 40 kilometres south of the capital. President Zelensky's office also said that Russian forces blew up a gas pipeline in Kharkiv, prompting the government to warn people to protect themselves from the smoke by covering their windows. OK, so let's go to our global security editor, Rohit Kachu now. Rohit, like the majority of people in Kyiv last night, you spent the night in a shelter for safety. So what was the situation overnight and how are things looking for today?
Yeah, Charlene, I mean, that is a familiar routine now, but last night we saw much more of it than on any of the previous nights. Our entire team raced down to the underground bunker as the air raids sirens sounded right across this city. This is a routine, a pattern that is known and is familiar to so many people nearby. In the metro stations, people were huddling together underground there as well. It was another dark night of heavy shelling, of loud explosions, of reports of gunfire in parts of the city, but the sky was lit up by these huge pulsing red clouds after strikes at an oil depot which is right next to a military airfield a few miles. I think you can see the aftermath now on our live shot here, the plumes of smoke rising up. The strikes happened a few hours ago and they were very, very loud. They sent up this plume of smoke and we could see red cloud right across the horizon of the city. That is Vasikhiv, which is around 20 miles away from where we are. And then just a few minutes ago, we heard another explosion, maybe 3, 4, 5 miles from where we're standing. And the significance of that, it happened about 20 minutes, 30 minutes ago, was the closeness, the proximity right here to the heart of the city. And the fear is, of course, that the Russian forces are closing in on the heart of the city, where the government is, where the presidential palace is. However, we're hearing today from the defense minister, who has this morning put out this really defiant message. I'm going to read you a bit of it, Charlene. He says, he almost mocks the Russian operation. He says, "Where are all those who promised to capture Kyiv in 2 hours? Where are they at? I can't see them. I can only hear them justify themselves. Instead, I see a heroic army, a civil guard, fearless border guards, selfless rescuers, reliable police officers, tireless medical angels." We'll see what today holds. There is a curfew that is in effect right through the day until tomorrow morning. But as it stands, despite some predictions that Russian forces would rapidly take this city, it is still being held by a Ukrainian military resistance.
And that's quite remarkable, isn't it? And it certainly is not what Putin would have assumed would have happened, because that Ukrainian defence is holding far firmer than any of us could have assumed.
Yeah, and it is supported by this huge civilian army of tens of thousands of ordinary people who have signed up in the last few days. We've seen recent appeals from the Ukrainian military to foreigners and to Ukrainians living abroad to come to support the military resistance here. Today will be telling, I think, because the sense was by this point, if the Russians went at this with full force, according to the intelligence assessments that preceded this invasion, that they would by now be right here in the middle of Kyiv. I mean, they're on the outskirts. The Ukrainians are resisting; they're fighting back. But it's really difficult to know with any certainty what's going on. You know, we have Ukrainian allies like the UK and the US who are talking up their resistance, who are saying very firmly that Russia are losing momentum. Well, of course they might say that because it is in their interest to boost the morale of the Ukrainian side. However, what we can say with certainty is that right here in the capital, this place is still held by the Ukrainian military.
Okay, Rohit, thank you very much for that. And we'll catch up with Rohit a little bit later on in the programme. But let's go west now and talk to Richard Gaisford, who is in Western Ukraine for us. And there's not been much fighting overnight, but refugees are arriving. So what's the situation like where you are, Richard?
Yeah, we're in Khmelnytskyi, which is normally a quiet city, but on the Sunday morning is actually a hive of activity, Charlene. Take a look here. This is the local cinema. It's been turned into a refugee centre, and you get an idea of how nervous they are because of the sandbags they've now piled up in the front of the building here. There's been a steady stream of people coming into this building. I'll send Rav on camera in now, and they're starting to bring a huge amount of clothing, of warm bedding, other supplies for the hundreds of refugees who are coming through this place now, and they expect that number to grow over the coming days. If you come through into what was the cinema, you can see there's an awful lot of people here. Now, I'm going to just explain to you that the people we're about to talk to are extremely nervous. They've fled from Russian forces. They don't want their faces shown, so we'll keep their backs to the camera, and Ina, our translator here, is going to ask questions. Ina, can you ask them where they've come from and why?
Звідки ви приїхали і чому? Ми з міста Харкова. We are from Kharkiv.
And why did they come from Kharkiv here?
And і чому ви приїхали з Харкова сюди?
Ми приїхали зі своєю сім'єю. Це наша бабуся, мій чоловік, я та наша маленька дитина, 11 років.
We've came here with our family. That's my husband, my grandmother and my daughter who's 11 years old. І чому?
And can I just ask this gentleman where they're going to go next? What happens next for these families?
І куди ви далі плануєте їхати?
Я скажу, ми далі плануємо відправити бабусю з дитиною до друзів до Польщі.
So we are planning on sending our grandmother with the child to Poland, to our friends.
Самі будемо вирішувати, то лі до Харкова повертатись, то лі десь. Насправді не розуміємо до кінця, що робити будемо.
And ourselves, we are going to decide whether we will return to Kharkiv, and we don't really understand what to do. We don't really know what to do.
Well, thank you for talking to us this morning. Everyone here very scared of what's happening, and this registration desk is incredibly busy here, Charlene, at the centre. They're trying to locate people, put people together, get people booked in. The money for this centre is currently coming from churches, from the local city council, locals doing what they can. Let me bring Ina in here. I mean, there's an awful lot of hard work happening here. What are you doing, and what are your other volunteers doing?
Yeah, all people here are volunteers, the citizens, and we help the refugees from the north and eastern part of Ukraine who try to save their lives, to find a place to spend their night, and all the citizens bring clothes, food, medicine here, and we just sort them and help to...
we should tell people back home in the United Kingdom that people in this city, they're not seeing the fighting, but they're feeling the fear of this conflict, aren't they?
Yes, of course, because we don't feel safe in this situation because of the war, and we are peaceful. We don't want to fight. We have no anger to the occupants, but we want to save our lives and want our children to live in a peaceful country.
And you want to tell people back in the United Kingdom that no one understands this war, why this war is happening.
I just can give my opinion, not the opinion of all the nation, but we think it's all because of one person and his ambitions. Everybody knows who I mean, the president of Russian Federation, and maybe that's because Ukrainians are very brave and free people, and they don't want to be, I don't know, slaves, but they don't want to realize that we won't be the slaves and we want to serve some other people because we are independent and sovereign.
And I feel that here in the city. Thank you for talking to us. You really get a sense, Charlene, of just how patriotic, how strong these people are. Just outside the volunteer centre for the army continues to have a long queue this morning of people willing to sign up. Men, of course, aged 18 to 65 are being told they can't leave the country, they need to get involved. Let me just see if I can just show you one more thing as we come through. I'm sorry, good morning to you. I mean, this cinema obviously now completely retasked. There's the popcorn machine, there's where people would normally come to get their refreshments, but out the back here you've got a whole team of volunteers who are now sorting food. They're not expecting the refugees here to stay for any long periods of time. It's not that kind of setup, but they are trying to give people the comfort they need, the food they need to continue on with their journeys or to wherever they're going next. It is quite an endeavour, and this place has only been open for 2 days. I can only imagine what's going to be happening over the coming days and weeks as the problems get worse in this country.
Richard, I mean, you being in a cinema is certainly a true reflection of just how normal a city, how normal a country this was up until Thursday morning, and seeing the way in which everybody's sort of trying to do something to try and remedy the situation and just to make their lives a little bit easier considering what is on its way and what is currently happening. Let's talk to our political editor, Robert Peston, who's over at Westminster for us this morning. Robert, we've had some major developments overnight regarding financial sanctions against Russia. We had that agreement between the US, UK and EU to block a number of payments, global payments from that system called SWIFT. Robert, can you just talk us through what the system is and how a significant move this is?
Yeah, so what you're saying, Charlene, late last night, the most dramatic set of punishments against Putin's Russia in the form of sanctions and the expulsion of Russian banks from the SWIFT system for most of their transactions. Now, just to explain, SWIFT is the electronic system that allows banks across the world to transfer money between them. And what it effectively means is that Russia will not be able to pay for imports anymore. It will also be almost impossible for Russia to export much of what it wants to sell to the world to keep its economy going. There was a separate, incredibly important punishment imposed on Russia, which was its central bank will not be able to use more than $600 billion of reserves that it's built up. It built these reserves up because Putin wanted to be able to use these reserves to, in a sense, oil the wheels of the Russian economy in the event that its banks were shut out of global markets. So what I would expect to see tomorrow is, first of all, the ruble, the Russian currency, absolutely collapsing, which will put up the price of almost everything for Russian people. There's a risk of rampant inflation, and there is a risk, and I talked about this actually on News at 10 last night, that banks will go bust, that Russian people and Russian businesses will panic, try and get their money out. We'll see bank runs and a full-scale crisis of a financial crisis. Now, just to be clear, because the West, particularly Germany, Italy and the European Union, are so dependent on Russian oil and gas, they are going to try and shape these restrictions on Russian banks, restrictions to use the SWIFT system, to all business excluding oil and gas. I think they will probably struggle to do that, but nonetheless that is what they're going to try and do, because of course if Germany and Italy were unable to purchase vital supplies of oil and gas, not only would we see the gas price soaring even more than it has already, and it is hitting levels we never thought we would see. Germany and Italy would also slightly struggle to keep the lights on because they are so dependent on oil and gas.
But Robert, as we know, this isn't the first time that Russia's had to deal with sanctions. So what do you think Putin's reaction will be this time round?
So look, these are significantly worse, more punishing sanctions than Russia has ever faced from the West. They're very similar actually to the way that we shut the Iran economy out of the global economy. And you can recall the extraordinary impoverishment that then followed in Iran. The answer is I don't really know how he gets out of this hole, because really quite quickly Russian citizens will feel a lot poorer. And even if he continues to be able to control the information they're seeing about what's going on in Ukraine and deprive them of the footage of the really terrible things that Russian soldiers are doing, they're just going to feel incredibly financially insecure and a lot poorer. So, obviously the hope of the West is that these sanctions will increase popular pressure against Putin to pull back from Ukraine. Obviously, however, we can't be certain, because this is a very determined, some people think actually he's not behaving remotely in a rational way, he's behaving in an emotional way. We can't be certain that he will do that. But this is, as I say, by quite a wide margin, the toughest action that the West has ever taken against Russia, and in many ways is much more significant than the military help that it's giving Ukraine at the moment.
Okay, Robert, thank you. Well, the US, of course, was a part of that agreement where that SWIFT payment system is concerned. So let's talk to our US correspondent, Emma Murphy, who's in Washington for us. So, Emma, what are the Americans saying about these financial sanctions then?
Well, they're extremely pleased that they've been able to get it to this point, because just on Thursday the president was speaking with the press and he was being really pushed on this issue of SWIFT, and he said that basically they just weren't able to get it across the line because they didn't feel that there was enough strength within the coalition in Europe, because there was so many vested interests they wouldn't be able to achieve a joined up approach to it. So last night we spoke with some officials in the administration, and they were saying that basically this was a real victory for Europe, the US and the UK in being able to come together as they had to really push it forward. They described it as locking President Putin's piggy bank, the fact that they had got their hands on his rainy day money, and it would mean that he wasn't going to be able to prop up the economy in the way that he had been hoping he would be able to for years. They have this image of Fortress Russia, the way that the Kremlin has tried to insulate itself from any sanctions that the West might have put in the future. And the US opinion very much is that they have now really taken that piggy bank and taken it out of his control. So they were very pleased, and I think that they are now looking at what they do next, because of course they've pretty much put all their cards on the table in terms of financial sanctions. So whilst everybody is trying to take in what this is going to mean for the economy in Russia and indeed for Western economies, there is also a more strategic set of thoughts going on here as to where they go next if this doesn't actually do what they want it to do and tame President Putin.
Well, obviously these sanctions have obviously been brought in because of what's happening in Ukraine. So do we know how this move has been received by Ukrainians, Emma?
Yeah, I spent a lot of time yesterday at the Ukrainian embassy here in Washington and speaking with those who are trying to deal with the situation back home from 6,000 miles away. And they were really very delighted that this had been managed to be achieved, because it's something that they'd been pushing for now for the past weeks, and they weren't sure, just like the Americans, that they were going to be able to see it actually come to fruition. And one of the things that really struck me during the time that I spent there yesterday yesterday was the feeling of desperation from these people. You know, these are senior diplomats who are in one of the biggest jobs in Ukraine's foreign service, and they were taking calls from the White House on an hourly basis. They were also taking calls from home. So whilst they're dealing with some of the most important people and politicians in the world, they were also getting these messages from their families saying, we've just got our shipment of arms, we have just got a gun, we're going out onto the streets. Others were telling me that their homes were being shelled with their families close by at the same time as they were trying to negotiate all these big political deals. One of the other things that came out of the meeting yesterday was that they were telling me they'd had a lot of phone calls over the past 48 hours from Ukrainians living in America and elsewhere saying that they wanted to go back to defend their homeland. Now, this morning we've heard from President Zelensky that he wants to set up a foreign legion of fighters, of people who have left Ukraine and have made lives in different countries, but that they want to go back to Ukraine now to try and help their families and countrymen. And that's something that, without question, there will be a lot of support for, based on what the ambassador was telling me yesterday.
Okay, thanks very much, Emma. Okay, let's get a reminder of the unfolding situation in Ukraine. After a gas pipeline was bombed overnight, Russian troops have entered the country's second largest city of Kharkiv, that's in the northeast. There's reports to be fighting on the streets. And there was another night of unrest in Kyiv. Among the targets, an oil refinery only a few miles outside the capital that was hit by Russian missiles. Well, our correspondent Robert Moore has joined us in the studio and will be here for the duration. Thanks so much, Robert. But where do you think we are at the moment? Where do things stand?
Good morning, Charlene. Dramatic developments, obviously, in Ukraine. The stakes are so high, almost existential now for both sides. Obviously, Ukraine fighting for the survival of its democracy, but no less Vladimir Putin fighting for the survival of his regime. It's difficult to see if he faces sort of national humiliation, military defeat, economic collapse, how he is going to emerge from this with his pride, perhaps even his leadership intact. But I think it is worth at this point sort of coming out and looking at the big picture. You know, this isn't just a battle between Russia and Ukraine. It is something of a sort of battle for the soul of democracy. It's a fight between democracies and autocracies. And by that I mean there are plenty of autocrats around the world, whether in Beijing or Pyongyang, Damascus or Tehran, who are watching this with incredible curiosity to see if Western leadership is fatally weakened and whether out of this chaos is opportunity for them.
And do you think that, I spoke to Robert Peston about those sanctions. How do you think Putin will be thinking about the tough financial sanctions that they've now brought in?
You know, we think of conflict often in sort of surgical terms, days, perhaps a few weeks. If you think about how he conducted his first war, the Second Chechen War in the year 2000, and also, you know, how he perceives operations in Syria, then he may think, look, I can tolerate, you know, a slow, grinding war in the heart of Europe. And that, I think, is the West's big concern, is that this could be a sort of destabilizing issue that lasts for years, that has ramifications for all of the sort of fault lines of old imperialist Soviet Union, you know, across the Baltics, the Caucasus, Central Asia. You know, this could have a sort of cascading, destabilizing impact, and I think that's a source of gravest concern to Western decision makers.
And you know, we've just had something come in, Robert. I'm just going to click on it now to just right. So the Kremlin says that a Russian delegation has arrived in the Belarusian city of Homel for talks with Ukrainian officials. How significant is that?
Well, I think there is always going to be this sort of move to try and keep diplomacy alive in some sense, but this is going to be sort of shadow diplomacy. It's going to be sort of fought out in the shadow of the sort of military dynamics on the ground in Ukraine. So, you know, there's been lots of talk about whether a country like Israel might try and play an intermediary role, and there will be this. I mean, there will be a mix of diplomacy, informational warfare, hybrid warfare, military, you know, ground war. All of this is going to play out. This is the sort of hybrid warfare of the 21st century, and diplomacy is absolutely a part of that.
Okay, Robert, you will be staying with us for this programme, so we'll dip in with you as and when. But now let's talk to a resident of Kyiv, Denis Tutsayev. Thanks so much for talking to us this morning, Denis. And you've spent the night in a shelter on the outskirts of the city. What was that like for you and the family? Oh, unfortunately, it's understandably.
Maybe there is a connection problem because I cannot hear you.
Unfortunately, Dennis can't hear us at the moment, but that's not a problem at all. We will redial him and see if we can get hold of him a little bit later on in the programme. But let's talk about sport now. Public opposition to the Ukraine invasion appears to be behind the shock decision last night by Chelsea's Russian owner to hand over control of the club. Roman Abramovich, often closely linked to President Putin, is not selling, but giving the running of the business to Chelsea's charitable foundation. Our sports editor Steve Scott reports.
Billionaire Roman Abramovich made his considerable fortune following the collapse of the Soviet Union. He bought Chelsea in 2003 and his wealth transformed the club. Under his stewardship, it's won just about every major trophy available, including multiple Premier Leagues and 2 Champions League titles. In a statement, Abramovich said, "I have always taken decisions with the club's best interest at heart." And on handing day-to-day control to the charitable foundation, he said, "I believe that currently they are in the best position to look after the interests of the club, players, staff and fans."
Roman Abramovich wants to protect 2 things. First of all, himself, and secondly, Chelsea Football Club. If the British government decides to seize his assets, he is the owner of Chelsea Football Club, and therefore potentially he could lose it.
This week in the Commons, MP Chris Bryant revealed Abramovich was named in government papers linking him to the Russian state and questioned his ownership of Chelsea.
Surely Mr. Abramovich should no longer be able to own a football club.
Abramovich is not on any sanctions list, but if that changed, running the club would become at best complicated. These developments came where sport once again used its platform to show support for Ukraine. Soon after ditching Aeroflot as a main sponsor, Manchester United's players called for peace. Before they arrived at Twickenham, the Duke and Duchess of Cambridge said they stood with Ukraine's fight for its future. And Manchester City made it very clear where they stood, some small comfort perhaps to their Ukrainian player, Alexander Zinchenko. Russia has already been stripped of the Champions League final, and Poland announced earlier they are now refusing to play their World Cup playoff match against Russia next month. Russia's considerable influence across all sport is disintegrating by the hour. Steve Scott, ITV News.
OK, if you are just joining us, we are on air with ITV News with a special programme on Ukraine as the country faced a night of heavy bombardment. Russian troops have entered the country's second largest city of Kharkiv in the northeast, where a gas pipeline was bombed last night. There are reported to be fighting on the streets. And there was another night of unrest in Kyiv. An oil refinery was hit by Russian missiles only a few miles outside the capital. And the city is under a strict curfew as many residents have heeded government advice to spend the night sheltering underground in metro stations and basements. And the EU, the US and their allies have now agreed to cut a number of Russian banks from the main international payment system known as SWIFT. OK, let's see if we can get a clearer line with Denis Sutsayev, who's currently in Kyiv. Denis, you spent the night, as I said, in a shelter on the outskirts of the city. What was that like for you and the family?
Hello. Yeah, the night was quite scary, and we were very anxious. It was heavy bombing. We heard, I don't remember what time was it, but in some point we heard very loud explosion. It was coming from the western side from our village. After that, we found out that Vasilkiv oil refinery was hit by a missile. People are very scared. People are anxious. They trying to get as much information as possible. But yeah, we're all quite scared. But getting organized to be able to help keep the city alive and keep the city Ukrainian.
I mean, these situations can happen all over the world, but it does feel for us here in the UK so much closer to home because you're in Europe, because you're just 2 hours away from us by plane. So what is it like For you, a week ago, your life is very different from what it's like now. How does it feel for you to be having to sleep underground, worried about what the next day will bring?
It's very unusual, of course, and I really feel a lot the support of all my friends around the world. I've been living in Europe for many years, and I'm getting a lot of messages from all over the country. I have lots of friends in UK, and of course, it's very unusual. We had lots of plans to travel around Ukraine for some work. Even today, we had a trip planned for work next week, and everything went upside down. We understand that now we have to organize ourselves to protect the country, and that's what we're doing.
Are you quite scared, Dennis?
I would say that I don't feel so scared. I just mostly I feel like very confused of what I actually should be doing. Yesterday we started organizing volunteers camp here, volunteers center here in our village, because we understood that our forces and our people need some aid need some help. So I found myself being one of the organizers because that's what I'm good in. I'm good in organizing logistics, getting their attention. And another role I'm finding for myself in this point is to get the information outside of Ukraine to the international media, to friends, so everybody knows what exactly is happening in Ukraine right now.
Do you foresee a situation, Dennis, where you will have to take up arms to protect your city and your country?
This is the last thing I would like to do. I really don't know how to fight. I don't know about arms. For years, I've been training people about nonviolent resistance, but I understand that if I need to protect myself, protect my family, I will have to.
And in terms of your day-to-day, let's talk about what it is that you're planning on doing today in terms of helping your family, helping your community. What are your plans for today? Because of course you're in curfew, you can't really go anywhere. So what is it that you're planning on doing with your day-to-day?
So today we are in curfew, that's true, but we are cooperating with our military here in the area, so we can deliver the food, so we can get food from people who are volunteering to donate food or fuel or some materials that are needed. Right now we're planning our logistics for the day, transportation, how we can get to our neighbors safely and get the materials we need. So during the day, actually, we will, until the curfew again arrives, we will try to get as much supplies as we can.
Oh, well, Dennis, while you're doing that, please do keep safe, because we're going to now go back to Rohit Khatri, because there is some shelling in Kyiv at the moment of Rohit. Are you able to talk to us?
Yeah, I can hear you, Charlene, and what we heard was an almighty explosion within the last 90 seconds or so. We're scanning the horizon with our two cameras here, trying to see the aftermath, it's really difficult to work out where these things are coming in from and eventually where they land, but you certainly know they have landed. And to me, that blast sounded particularly close to the center of the city. It's hard to be precise by a sight or by vision, but we're out, can't hear any air raid sirens yet. I'd expect they'll be going off very shortly, because that was a really loud blast, and we've been looking across the city for most of the morning, ever since the early hours when we saw these huge pulsating red clouds which were rising up from the site of an oil depot close to a military airfield around 20 miles from here. The entire sky turned red when these airstrikes came in, several loud blasts, and we can actually on our other cameras still see the aftermath, still see the plume of smoke rising, but here in the center of the city, unsettling, uncertain moment. We're listening out. We're looking out to try and work out where that landed. You know, our view is obscured by some of the buildings in front of us, you know, the government ministries right in front of us, apartment blocks to our left, to our right. But that sounded like a very loud blast. And, we'll stay on this shot just because, you know, it's perhaps, you can hear some car sirens now going off in the distance. I don't know if you can hear that, Charlene.
Rohit, it's Robert Moore here in the studio. What do the city defences look like? Have the defenders blown the bridges? Is there a sense that they've turned this into a sort of defensive maze to meet any Russian offensive into the heart of Kiev?
Robert, we're perhaps entering that stage. What's interesting about some of the airstrikes that we witnessed in the last hour or two is how close to the river they are. This is to our left. I don't know if you can see that, Dan, but that's the river that runs right through this city. We saw on Friday afternoon an intense firefight between Ukrainian forces on the right-hand side and Russian forces towards the left-hand side, and it was clear that the fighting was heading towards those bridge locations, towards the riverbank here. And so what appears to have been apparent overnight is that a lot of the Russian focus has been along the river and along some of those bridges. But the scenario you outlined there, Robert, which has been described in intelligence reports which preempted this invasion, talk about that sort of operation. My assessment is we're not quite fully in that phase yet, but the fear of Ukrainian forces is that we may well be entering that moment.
Rohit, we've just had a statement from President Zelensky, who gave a statement to a TV station in Ukrainian, saying that he is rejecting those talks in Belarus, because we just heard from the Kremlin saying that a Russian delegation had arrived in the Belarusian city of Homel for talks with Ukrainian officials. And so President Zelensky has said that he is rejecting those talks in Belarus. What do you make of that?
Okay, that's really interesting and perhaps not unexpected, because the tone of Zelensky's narrative throughout the last 3 or 4 days was that you know, and he perhaps has an interest in promoting this sort of narrative, but that he had the upper hand, that he was in control, and that the Russian offers or the Russian discussion about potential dialogue was actually a sign of weakness on their part. And so I guess there are two parts to this, you know, what we see in front of the cameras in those public statements, but behind the scenes also what that dialogue about diplomacy says about who is winning this war and what the impact of that is on the morale of the Russian side and the Ukrainian side.
Okay, Rohit, thank you very much for that, and you know, do keep us up to date on exactly what it is that you're witnessing there where you're in Kyiv. But let's go to Dan Rivers now, who's in the eastern city of Dnipro, close to Ukraine's eastern border with Russia. Dan, can you talk us through what the situation is like where you are?
Well, we're in the central railway station here in Dnipro, where you can see there's lots of people who are hoping to get out of this city and get to some safety. You probably notice there's a lot of foreign students here. This is a big university town. They've all been watching the local television reports and, you know, with growing alarm. The Russian special forces are about 2 hours south of here and advancing north. So people are really very keen to get out. I think we can talk to someone. This gentleman here we talked to earlier on. Hello, good morning.
Yeah.
Just tell us, where are you from?
I'm from Nigeria.
Yeah, and you're hoping to get out as soon as possible?
Yeah, we are all hoping to get out as soon as possible.
Yeah.
There are mostly students here from Nigeria and other African countries. So we are trying to see how we can evacuate them, and some few Indian students remaining. How can we move everybody out, at least out of Dnipro, to a little bit safer zone, maybe Lviv, Uzhgorod or Ternopil or Ivano for the meantime. Then they can be moved from there if possible.
Yeah. Thank you so much for talking to us, and good luck with your journey out. This gentleman I talked to earlier on, hello.
Good morning, hi, how's it going?
And where are you from?
Oh, I'm Lebanese, and I've lived in Brighton for a good 7-8 years, and I love England and all that. As you can see, there's like a humanitarian crisis here. It's really terrifying. People are starting to hoard food, and it's starting to look bad on the streets. Like shops are closing, food supply. It's a humanitarian crisis. Please, I urge like anyone who's listening to de-escalate. Try to contain the situation, not make it worse. Don't exacerbate. Don't threaten. Please, I beg you. We just need to get out of here until at least let like the innocent people flee. The ones that don't want this war, let us out of here. Like most people don't want this war, and please don't talk about NATO and aggression and all of that. Please try to de-escalate. We just want to negotiate peace, and you know, we're all humans at the end of the day. And
how long have you lived in this city?
I've only been here for a couple of months. I'm fourth year med student, and I transferred here, and I was doing it online, and I'm continuing my last 2 years here, medical school offline.
And where will you go now?
Right now, I'm going to go to Lebanon, hopefully, and then from Lebanon, I'll probably try to go to England as well.
I mean, it says a lot about the state of affairs here that you consider going to Lebanon, which has got its own fair share of problems, a safer option.
Intense, yeah, exactly. Right now, we're looking at the brink of like war with Israel and Lebanon. Like every other day, there's like conflicts and stuff going on over there. Yeah, but even there, it'll be safer than here, because what's going on, what we heard like 2 days ago was terrifying. You know, what we heard 2 days ago was really brutal.
Best of luck getting out.
Thank you so much.
Okay, take care. Cheers. So you can see that there's a whole range of people here. I think we can probably talk to this with the help of our translator. This Ukrainian family. Good morning. Just tell us very briefly where are you hoping to get to?
Я намагаюся евакуювати свою родину до Львова.
He's trying to get his family to Lviv now.
So they're trying to get to Lviv, and just let's have a look here. So you've got how many children have you got with you?
Як багато дітей з вами?
Ну от троє.
Двоє.
Two of them. And how old are your children?
Скільки років?
Що?
Скільки років?
7 і 12.
7 and 12.
7 and 12. And just lastly, how are they coping? They must be very worried.
Як вони це переносять? Вони сильно налякані?
Ні, ну як ви думаєте, вони це переносять? Ну що за задаєте запитання?
Yeah.
Бачите, що скрізь.
Obviously, very unsettling. Okay, I think we'll hand back to you, Charlene, but you get a sense of certainly what's going on and other trains arriving from other parts of the country trying to get further west here.
Okay, Dan, thank you very much. And of course, there are so many children involved in this, and they just will have such a lack of understanding about what is going on with their everyday lives. Because last week they were at school, this week they're running for their lives. We're joined now by Sir Andrew Wood, who is a former British ambassador to Russia. Thank you so much for joining us. What do you make of what's happened in the last 24 hours, Sir Andrew?
Well, I think two things have become evident. First, that Putin has made a fantastically bad decision, because things are not going as well as he had supposed. He naively supposed that there'd be lots of Ukrainians coming out on the streets with flags saying, "Welcome Russia." And secondly, he's not doing anything for his standing at home. He is the person that took the decision. He is the person that moved the discussion towards that decision, and he is responsible. That will have effects on his standing at home, because although he's a very powerful leader in the sense of having control over a lot of things in Russia, well, nearly everything in Russia, he's a bad leader for not really having any concrete proposals to make governing Russia a better system.
Did any of what he's done since last week Thursday, has any of this surprised you in any shape or form? Because it feels as though he's been leading up to this point without much resistance thus far.
Without much resistance in Russia, yes. He had not expected the degree of resistance in Ukraine. But to answer your question more directly, I think it is exactly what he was planning. But if part of that plan is to install a Ukrainian leader of some sort in Kiev to control that country, then it's a complete defeat for him. Nobody in Ukraine can now be a legitimate leader. It would have to be somebody governed by Russians themselves and imposed by Russians.
And so you were, of course, working in Russia for quite some time, Sir Andrew. I mean, what do you make of Putin as a leader?
I think he's been highly destructive. He's destroyed the constitution. He had a period of enormous prosperity because of the price of oil. But since then, the economy has been bad. He dealt badly with the COVID virus, and he has silenced discussion in Russia. And you can't have a decent place where people are not allowed to talk about new ideas and to develop new properties. So I think it's been pretty disastrous, unless you think that having a large army and using it is the mark of a great power.
So Andrew, it's Robert Moore here in the studio. Do you regard still President Putin as sort of a rational actor? You know, we've often perceived him over the last 22 years of his rule as a sort of master chess player, but it seems he's made one of the greatest miscalculations since perhaps the invasion of Afghanistan in 1979, perhaps the worst miscalculation since the Soviet Nazi pact of 1939. Where do you think he is? I mean, people are suggesting there is a sort of paranoia now, an isolation in the Kremlin. Is that a view you hold?
Well, there's always been a degree of paranoia because I think almost anybody who takes total charge is going to suffer from paranoia. It's just natural. Secondly, we have to remember that he's been there for over 20 years now, and that does a lot to anybody to be 20 years in power and never being contradicted. It's not a collective system that he's running, it's his system. So that would be my answer. I think paranoia is a perfectly legitimate word to use, but misjudgment, total misjudgment about Ukraine is another.
Okay, well, Sir Andrew, thank you so much for talking to us this morning. We're going to go now to Poland because we know that more than 120,000 people have fled Ukraine, many of whom have travelled to Poland, where we can talk now to our reporter, Lucy Watson. Lucy, you're at a train station close to the border with Ukraine, and you've seen so many people in the last 24 hours, so many children, in fact, trying to go to somewhere safe.
Yes, Charlene, we are about 10 miles from one of the major crossing points, the main point where people come across by foot from the Ukraine. And we were here just 2 days ago, and the situation has escalated beyond belief, really. There are so many more people here this time today. As you can see, people are packing up their makeshift beds from last night. There are kind of makeshift mattresses here where people have spent the night just on this floor. Now, this room is almost like the major arrivals hall, if you like, and you can see just how many people are. This is here a voluntary fire service who have almost like a database, if you like, a list of people who are offering beds for the night. Just a little bit to the right over here is where they're giving out anything from fruit to Polish sausages. People are stocking up on supplies because they arrive here with pretty much nothing. They have left their homes, they have grabbed their documents, they have left quickly. There was just a short time ago, this little girl here, she managed to grab her cat. Her and her mum have their cats inside this little box here. They have grabbed what they care about, what is normal life to them, whatever they can from home. And if you come outside with me now onto the platform, now at the moment, well, in terms of this crisis, it is relatively quiet, but you can see that where they have set up cooking and where they can give hot drinks, hot soup to people when they first arrive. Now, the situation here in Poland is pretty awful, but over on the Ukrainian side, it is dreadful. We were sent video overnight. I don't know if we can show it to you, but this was a station in Lviv, which is about 20 miles away from Poland. Through the night, you can see so many people just clogging up all of the platforms. There is no space on the platforms. This is the middle of the night, and it is cold today and overnight. These are sub-zero temperatures that people are standing in this station in Lviv, just desperate to get out. We spoke to a woman yesterday called Svetlana. She was Canadian, She lived in Canada, but she was Ukrainian. She flew over last weekend to effectively rescue her elderly parents. She thought, I'm going to take them back to Canada. I don't quite know what is going to happen. Then days passed, and the unthinkable has happened. She made it out because her parents were just not ready to leave yet. She got across the border. We were on the train with her yesterday, but her elderly parents stayed behind with her brother, supposedly bringing them today. And she said, the situation is so horrific at the border. There are so many people now. There are elderly people, 80, 90-year-old people standing in queues. There are people waiting for 60 hours, people in cars waiting for that long. And this waiting time to get across is only going to grow as more people flock to countries like Poland, like Romania, desperately trying to get across. And she was crying to me on the train yesterday because she just doesn't know if her parents can withstand that. There are no toilets, there is no water, there is no food. That is Ukraine. Everything is closed. There are no shops. What she wanted me to do, what she begged me to do, she said, please tell the world, tell who you can. And that is what I'm doing effectively now, really, to describe just how dreadful the situation is. It is desperate, and people, particularly on the edge of Ukraine, before they get here, need help desperately.
I mean, looking at the shots that you were sent of those people standing at the train station, it must be such a horrific situation for them, and I know that they are telling you their stories. What is it that they're providing for them in Poland? Are there difficulties with them coming in, or is Poland generally sort of welcoming them with open arms and just trying to help?
I mean, from an emotional standpoint, I suppose everybody that we have spoken to in Poland is, of course, welcoming them with open arms. How can you not in such a desperate situation? But when you're dealing with this number of people in such a short space of time, of course, administration, bureaucracy, it takes time. Processing people coming across the border, computer systems, they go down, they're delayed. This is a huge scale operation. So it's nobody's fault that it is taking so long for these people to get here, but it doesn't make it any easier for them. What they need is food, the necessities, the basics of life. They need food, they need water, they need shelter, they need warmth. Just a bit further down at this platform, as I say, it is empty now, but the trains are constantly arriving. We're just having a bit of a lull, but you can see just off the platform are waiting rooms, and we only arrived a short time ago ourselves, but through those waiting rooms, I mean, they're kind of blocked off to us because they don't want distressed people to be filmed too much. But there are buggies lined up. That's the image that has struck me first this morning, is there are so many buggies lined up. Presumably those children have been taken out of those buggies. They're cuddling their mothers on makeshift beds or in chairs. But you see so many of them. Every single one of those buggies is a young child who was at nursery school, who was at, being looked after by their parents. Their parents were going to work, eating, drinking in cafes, doing the things that you and I were doing 2-3 days ago. Now the unthinkable has happened to them. And this is not a developing third world nation. This is Europe.
It's Robert Moore here in the studio, Lucy. Your empathetic reporting is so moving and striking. I wonder if the refugees coming across that border in Western Ukraine, do they feel that the West has stepped up? I mean, is this conflict going to end with them feeling grateful, or will they have a sense of betrayal that the West hasn't done more?
I mean, Robert, I suppose the essence of feeling they don't really care about politics right now. They care about basics. They care about, can I keep my child warm tonight? Where are we going to sleep tonight? They don't want my pity. They want help. So whether the West is doing enough right now, what they want is just the basics, Robert. They don't want to dwell on the politics. That they've left family members behind. They have husbands who have stayed behind. They have children that they need to feed. Those things are more important than telling me what my government should be doing. It is a stark situation to be in when you're asking questions as a journalist that you think you should ask, or you're preparing things that you should say, when actually there is just so much to say. I don't think in my career I've quite been in a situation like this before, where I'm not already planning what I'm about to tell you, because there is so much going on and there are so many stories. Everybody I'm talking to has a harrowing detail, or they've experienced something they have never experienced before, or they're trying to explain to their children what rockets are. They're only used to hearing those kind of noises at joyous occasions, firework nights, New Year's Eve, and a father is having to explain to his son, no, this is not joyous, this is not a fun occasion, this is someone trying to hurt us.
I'll tell you what, Lucy, every time you've given a report in the last couple of days, I think it's made a lot of us very emotional, especially those of us like you who have children and understand that it is difficult when you're trying to explain to them exactly what's going on. So thank you, and we will talk to you later on in the programme. But let's talk now to Aglaya Snetkov, who is an expert in Russian security at UCL. And Aglaya, Putin is facing a much greater deal of resistance from Ukraine than perhaps he initially expected.
I think he is. I mean, I think something to keep in mind is we don't know what Putin thinks. He's very isolated, and Western intelligence has been good, but, you know, that's just a caveat that, like, whatever we say is essentially what we are witnessing. But yes, he does, or the Russian troops seem to be facing a lot more resistance. There is clearly a big difference between the large-scale Russian military that we're seeing on the ground, but at the same time, the Ukrainian people, the Ukrainian leadership, which has, you know, really come out and really stepped up and are really fighting this war. It seems that, you know, if the Russians are really trying to take Kiev, take large population cities, they will face massive resistance. Whether they expected this or not, I don't know.
I mean, it does seem incredible that somebody wouldn't have expected Ukrainians to not want to defend their city, not want to defend their country, not want to simply be taken over. It just seems just unfathomable that somebody wouldn't expect that to happen.
Which is absolutely why a lot of experts and a lot of Russians, up until the last moment, thought that this wouldn't happen, because it's a major traditional conventional war in Europe, and therefore it does seem absolutely mad, but it is happening. And something we have to keep track of is, no matter what happens, whether this ends in days, weeks or months, we have to keep talking about it and we have to keep paying attention, because we don't know how this is going to unfold. The Russian army is very big. We have no idea. You know, Georgia 2008 took a few days. Afghanistan, you know, in the 80s took 10 years. We just have no idea, but we have to keep paying attention because it's a human tragedy. Ukraine, you know, is a country of 40 million people, right in the middle of Europe, where we're having conventional war, right, with discussions about air raids over large civilian cities. This, you know, hasn't happened for a long time. And, you know, I have family and relatives in Russia and in Ukraine. This is affecting a lot of people, not just on the ground, but also outside Ukraine. And everyone is watching this in absolute horror. And at the same time, we got the video released by the Russian presidential information today on the day of the Special Forces Day, talking about, you know, congratulating the heroic defense of Donbass, congratulating the forces, completely dispassionate. We have no idea when the video was recorded, not assuming it was today, but it was released today. And we do essentially have, you know, one man sitting in Moscow who is currently deciding the fate of 40 million people and the fate of Russians. I mean, this is something also to keep in mind. A lot of Russians are absolutely not in favor of this. This is not what, you know, they signed up for. They're also not being told about this. There's a huge difference between what we are seeing, what the Ukrainians are seeing, and what the Russians are seeing.
Very quickly, before I let you go, Aglaya, but you mentioned there that you've got family in Russia and in Ukraine. Are your Ukrainian family relatively safe at the moment?
I mean, I don't. The relatives in Ukraine have moved. They are from Eastern Ukraine. They moved to Kiev from Dnieper, thinking that this is going to be safer. I'm not sure.
Okay. I really hope they're going to be all right, Aglaia. Thank you so much for talking to us.
Thank you.
Good morning. If you're just joining us, it's just gone 8 o'clock here in the UK, 10 o'clock in Ukraine. We are on air with a special programme on Ukraine this morning as the country faced a night of heavy bombardment. Russian troops have entered the country's second largest city of Kharkiv in the northeast. There is reported to be fighting on the streets. Our cameras caught the aftermath of an explosion in Kyiv just a short time ago.
Эти мои слова будут обращены гражданам.
Meanwhile, the leader of Ukraine, President Zelensky, has in the last few minutes said his country is ready for peace talks with Russia, but not in Belarus. Okay, let's take a look at Kyiv this morning. We know explosions have been heard in the last few minutes. That plume of grey smoke, black smoke that you can see, just the rear of that shot, so the aftermath of the explosion on an oil refinery overnight. We'll be back talking with Rohit, who is in the city, Rohit Katru, in just a few moments. But it appears that Russian troops are now launching a sustained and determined assault on Kharkiv in the east of Ukraine. We can get the latest on that and the rest of the developments in the country overnight and this morning with John Ray.
Ukraine has survived another night of torment, another night of terror. This is said to be a fuel depot, ablaze to the south of Kyiv, as Russia targets the country's vital infrastructure and is met by defiance. In this social media post, the local mayor says, the enemy wants to destroy everything, but it will achieve nothing. God is with us. Under cover of darkness, a column of tanks headed towards Kharkiv, Ukraine's second city, that had also come under sustained air attack. Amid reports of gunfire and scenes of battle, by first light they were in the suburbs. 1.5 million residents have been warned by the regional governor to stay home. Vladimir Putin has staked his reputation on a war he must win, and win, some fear, at any cost. In response, the West has agreed its toughest sanctions yet to exclude some, though not all, Russian banks from the SWIFT financial system.
As Russian forces unleash their assault on Kiev and other Ukrainian cities, we are resolved to continue imposing massive costs on Russia. Costs that will further isolate Russia from the international financial system and our economies.
The Ukrainian military is reinforced by a citizens' army. With great bravery, some place themselves in the path of Russian tanks, while in the eastern city of Sumy, a petrol bomb was hurled at a Russian convoy. But the invading forces have also faced sophisticated anti-tank weapons supplied by NATO powers. And though there will be no UK troops on the ground, these missiles are made in Northern Ireland, now seen in the hands of Ukrainian soldiers.
The horror of what is unfolding in Ukraine is becoming clear to Western audiences, and that is in turn putting huge pressure on Western politicians. We've got to act together, and we've got to do more.
As Russia's assault intensifies, so its international isolation deepens. Last week, Donald Trump flattered Putin. Last night, he praised the Ukrainian president.
He's a brave man. He's hanging in. He's a brave man.
Prince Harry has added his voice to the wave of revulsion at Russian aggression.
Before I begin, we would like to acknowledge the people of Ukraine who urgently need our continued support as a global community.
The United Nations says at least 240 civilians have been killed or injured. For a fourth consecutive night in Kyiv, the safest place to sleep was the metro. But the capital woke this morning to the sound of sirens, a familiar and menacing omen for the day ahead. John Ray, ITV News.
Okay, let's go straight to our global security head, Rohit Katru, who is in Kyiv for us. How are things looking there this morning, Rohit?
Not great, frankly, Charlene. Over the last hour, we've heard and seen several airstrikes at locations right across the horizon from where we're standing. We can't move to see it because there is a curfew on, and so we are stuck where we are. But I think you can see on our other camera the aftermath of an airstrike within the last half an hour or so. We're trying to work out precisely where that is. It's to the northwest of us. We know that in that direction is the Hostomel airfield, which has been the scene of this fierce and intense fighting for several days now. An airfield which has switched sides in terms of control between the Russians and the Ukrainians several times. We know it's significant to the Russian plan because it is there that they wanted to land further troops in order to continue and progress their assault against this city. We also know that the suburb of Bucha is in that direction as well, where there has been sustained heavy firefights this morning. We've seen clips of that and reporting of that this morning on social media. So we're still trying to work out precisely what happened there. But even since then, in the last half hour, we have heard a couple more airstrikes. No sirens. The streets below us are completely empty. I can just see one police officer carrying what looks to me like a Kalashnikov below us, and it's been a really heavy night, a dark night where the sky was lit up by these red clouds, these pulsating clouds early this morning after what appears to have been several heavy strikes close to an oil depot which is adjacent to a military airfield, which appears to have been the target of one of those many overnight Russian strikes. On the diplomatic front, things are continuing. There has been some developments. The president here said rejected an offer from Russia of talks in Belarus, saying that the reason for that is in part the location. He doesn't feel that's a neutral location, but reading through that statement, it appears that he hasn't completely closed the door towards to talks. So there may well still be a diplomatic avenue out of some of the intense fighting.
But when you talk of a diplomatic resolution potentially to this, do you think that Putin will consider that in any shape or form? It feels as though he's very single-minded in what it is that he wants out of this.
Well, we'll have to wait and see what the impact of some of this latest round of sanctions is, and the developments that we've heard overnight in terms of the SWIFT system. The feeling, certainly the one that is being briefed to us by American and British authorities, and we have to treat that with some caution, I guess, because they too have an interest here in that the British and other Ukrainian authorities don't want to undermine Ukrainian morale. If anything, they want to boost it. However, what they're implying quite strongly and quite consistently across several capitals, Western capitals, is that they believe that the Russian offensive has lost momentum. What we can say for sure is that many observers, many military analysts talking about this before the Russian invasion said quite clearly that it may well just take a few days for the Russians to take this city. We're now a few days in, and they haven't done so, despite all the fighting, pockets of fighting, despite the airstrikes, despite the plumes of smoke that we can see right across the horizon. The Ukrainians still hold the city, and they are resisting this almighty Russian offensive.
Rohit, thank you. Okay, let's remind you of the latest developments. Overnight, huge explosions lit up the sky south of the capital where Rohit is, in Kyiv, where people hunkered down in homes, underground garages and subway stations in anticipation of a full-scale assault by Russian forces. Flames billowed into the air before dawn from an oil depot near the Zyliani airport, about 25 miles, that's 40 kilometres south of the capital. Ukrainian authorities say that Russian troops have entered Ukraine's second largest city of Kharkiv, and fighting is underway in the streets after Russian forces blew up a gas pipeline in Kharkiv, prompting the government to warn people to protect themselves from the smoke by covering their windows. Let's go now to Neil Connery, who's in Moscow for us. Now, we're hearing that President Putin has been speaking in the last few minutes in a televised address to the Russian people. What exactly did he have to say?
Well, it's Special Forces Day here in Russia, and President Putin was talking about what he called the heroic efforts of Russia's forces in the Donbass region of eastern Ukraine. As well as what President Putin has been saying, we've been getting a briefing from officials at the Ministry of Defense here in Moscow this morning. And it was interesting listening to what Rohit was saying there in the last few minutes, because what they're saying here is that they are using cruise missiles launched from land and from sea as well, targeting Ukraine's infrastructure. They also said that they'd had 470 Ukrainian soldiers who had surrendered in Kharkiv. We've seen action there, as John Ray was reporting there a short time ago as well. I mean, clearly it's difficult for us in Moscow to verify these claims, with so many claims flying around, but I think we're slowly starting to see the kind of plan, the way the Russians are trying to approach this mission seems to me to be targeting infrastructure rather than pushing in fast into those built-up urban areas straight away. That seems to be the kind of way the modus operandi is in all of this.
And in terms of dealing with how things are online, Neil, because of course this is like new territory, because they're having to deal with the truth perhaps on social media and trying to somehow change that in their propaganda war against it. Are they winning or losing that fight?
It's a really good point, Charlene. As you know, state TV for many Russians is their main source of news. There clearly is access to the internet, but having said that, yesterday we saw issues with Twitter, with Facebook. One small interesting point is that the regulator of the media here has picked up 10 media outlets for their use of the word invasion to describe what is happening inside Ukraine. They want it described as military special operations. It's just a small point, but I think it really tells you the importance of control here. I mean, ever since President Putin came to power 22 years ago, when he first came to power rather, he's understood the importance of controlling a message, controlling how the Russian people see situations like this. That's really crucial. And especially now that we've had these overnight developments in terms of sanctions, in terms of the SWIFT banking arrangements and the international finance system, he's going to be worried about what happens in the next couple of days, potentially to the ruble. Does that hit the floor? Does it crash through the floor tomorrow when the markets open? Are they going to have to consider trying to fix the ruble? I mean, the economic implications of this are really starting to sink in. He would have factored that clearly into his planning, $650 billion worth of foreign reserves in order to deal with all of this. But having said that, these developments overnight clearly complicate the way that Russians can do business. There are workarounds for them, but it's going to take time and cost money. So I think inside the Kremlin over the last 24 hours, things might not be going to plan as much as they thought, but he is still very much in control so far.
Neil, it's Robert Moore here in the studio. You and I have spent a lot of time in Moscow. We know how difficult it is to gauge public opinion. We're seeing reports that there are long sort of queues at cash points. And I wonder if you think the tipping point might be when the first funerals of Russian soldiers begin. You know, we know how powerful an image it can be in the sort of Russian motherland when it's mothers who are burying sons from a foreign war. I wonder if you think that might be a tipping point which could produce a sort of ripple effect across Russian society.
Very easily, Robert. I mean, that's why what state TV is broadcasting here is so fascinating to watch, because it is not the whole picture. Clearly, Russians are not seeing the whole picture of what is happening across Ukraine, and we saw that yesterday with the way that the restrictions were put on the internet at certain times as well. There was an opinion poll last week that said, you know, in terms of taking military action in Ukraine, opinion was fairly split 50-50. But I think ordinary Russians, Robert, have been shocked by the speed of all of this and why President Putin has done this. They are taking stock of this and they are worried about what it means for them, for their livelihoods in the days and weeks ahead.
Okay, Neil, thanks very much for that. OK, let's get a reminder of the unfolding situation in Ukraine in the last few minutes. Russian President Putin congratulated members of special forces, saying they fought heroically in Ukraine, while the Kremlin insisted it was ready for talks with Kyiv. While Ukraine's President Zelensky has said his country is ready for peace talks with Russia, but not in Belarus. Russian troops have entered the country's second city of Kharkiv. There is reported to be fighting on the streets. And our cameras caught the aftermath of an explosion in Kyiv just a short time ago. But let's talk once again to Richard Gaisford, who's in western Ukraine at a reception centre for people fleeing the violence. And Richard, it's a reception centre, but it used to, of course, be a cinema.
Yeah, and we've just come into the main auditorium, Charlene, and you can see the seats now stacked up with goods that are being donated here to give to the refugees who are coming through from the south and from the north. And if you look down just here, you can see people now sleeping in this cinema auditorium. This is the only place that they can find accommodation and the rest, the comfort that they need. The ladies here working through piles of clothes that have been donated for the refugees, many who have fled with just small bags just to get away from the Russian forces, and more people sleeping here right in front of what is the cinema screen. They show many Western movies here. This is a westernized society. We've just been talking to the cinema engineer, who is also the projectionist. He's been working here for 50 years. He's never seen anything like this in his cinema theatre. And when you come out into the foyers, more clothes come through, good morning, into this reception centre. And you can see this hive of activity here at the reception desk, where people come, they log themselves in just to say that they're here. They're trying to locate people, put people together. And as we walk through, let me bring in Ina, who we spoke to earlier. Ina, it's getting busier all of the time here, isn't it?
Yeah, that's right. So mornings are quiet, and most of the people arrive during the day.
And so many people have made very long and difficult journeys to be here.
Yeah, so maybe you know that there is the busy traffic from Kyiv to Zhytomyr, and they spent at least 6 hours to ride with just 100 kilometers. So that's why they are tired, they are exhausted, and they need some psychology support, and they need some hot food, and so.
And 800 people have been helped here so far. A lot more coming through all of the time. Mm-hmm. So many of these people are frightened about what's happened in their hometowns.
Yeah, sure, because Khmelnytsky is still quiet here for this time, for now. But a lot of cities were attacked and were bombed, and even the peaceful districts of Kyiv and Kharkiv and the buildings were destroyed. So of course the people are scared, especially the young children, and maybe you know that at least 2 small children were killed recently. So.
Well, thank you for talking to us this morning. The money that's funding all of this is coming from the local churches. There's an awful lot of people here helping out. What I wanted to show you, I can't show you in this room because we've got soldiers who are having a breakfast before they go off to Kyiv to fight. They've asked us not to show their faces, but if you hear what's happening behind me, this is quite fascinating, Charlene. This is the lobby of the cinema, but look at what these ladies are doing here. They are singing and making camouflage nets for soldiers to hide in, away from the Russian forces, to give them a chance of fighting back. And just have a listen to this lady's amazing voice. They are singing patriotic songs as they do their work here. And it is quite emotional actually to see. And the other thing I wanted to show you just before we disappear is up on the wall. This word in Ukrainian means unbreakable, and that's certainly what the Russian forces are facing now, an unbreakable Ukrainian army backed by ladies like this, volunteers across the country coming together to defend the country and to say we are not going to have what you want, Mr. Putin.
Thank you so much for that. We talk a lot about men in war, but women will always do their bit to protect their country. They certainly will. We're joined now by Helena Yanchenko, who is an MP in Ukraine's ruling party. We were just seeing women just there, Helena, who are making camouflage tents for probably their family members going out to defend their country. I mean, what's your reaction to that? Unfortunately, Helena's sound isn't quite working.
Can you hear me now?
Helena. I can hear you now, Helena. What is your reaction to that?
Yeah, well, hi. I'm speaking from Kyiv, from the basement of my house, because while I was waiting to talk to you, there were yet another sounds of aviations and bombs just above the capital city of Ukraine, of the European city. So I had to come back to come to the basement. What I should tell about the situation in Ukraine? This is the fourth day of Putin bombing cities, peaceful cities of our country, all over the country, all over the regions. A lot of civilian buildings were hit, like kindergartens, like orphanages, hospitals, and residential building. You can see this is the residential building in Kyiv on fire on your screen now, but the number of residential neighborhoods hit by Russian rockets, by Russian missiles, are much more. We were trying to call for action to the Western countries for 4 days in a row, saying that Russians have captured Chernobyl and it might cause a huge ecological catastrophe if they do anything to Chernobyl nuclear plant or the sarcophagus that saves the damaged part of Chernobyl nuclear plant. But tonight, yet another ecological catastrophe have happened because of Russian troops and from Russian weapon.
Helena, what, if anything, would you like the West to do to help where Ukraine is concerned?
Well, we were begging for 4 days. We were begging to block Russia from SWIFT, and believe me, 4 days of thinking and carrying negotiations is too much. So we really hope that Russia will be totally blocked from SWIFT, not only some selected banks, but the whole country. While Russia is still in SWIFT system, Putin can continue funding this war against innocent Ukrainian population. We have information that in Russia, on the military factories, they keep producing rockets, weapons, and send it to Ukraine. So it's very important to block the whole Russian system from SWIFT. This is number two, and this is number one, and number two is very important. It is very crucial to have no fly zone above Ukraine, because Russia is hitting Ukrainian cities from air with bombs, missiles, and aviation, and that's what they did to Vasilkiv oil point tonight. And we have fire next to Kyiv with tons of oil on fire. So it will cause a huge ecological catastrophe, not only for Ukraine but for the European countries. Also, Russian troops are firing their missiles next to the border between Ukraine and Poland. So now it's not only a threat to Ukraine but also to European countries and to NATO countries. So it's time to take some actions. There is no time to think, to hold negotiation. Western countries should react now.
Okay, well, Helena Yanchenko, thank you so much for talking to us, and please do stay safe. Okay, we can talk now to Shadow Foreign Secretary David Lammy. Thank you so much for joining us this morning. Helena Yanchenko there, asking the West to do more and take action. What more do you believe that we should be doing here?
Well, we of course have to support the effort in Ukraine and to assist them with military equipment, and I'm pleased to see the decision from Germany overnight that will make that much more possible over the coming days. Tomorrow we will see more sanctions in Parliament as I take through and support the government with their sanctions bill. We want to see sanctions on the insurance industry. Vladimir Putin should not be able to de-risk his finances and war effort in Ukraine. We want to see those names of the entities and individuals, the 100 individuals that Boris Johnson said would now be on the sanctions list. And we should be banning the export of luxury goods to Russia. All of that we've got to do over the coming days to squeeze Vladimir Putin much harder and cut him out of our financial system if we're serious about supporting our Ukrainian brothers and sisters.
I mean, one would assume that President Putin had, would have foresaw that these sanctions would come in place. So what if it's not enough? What if it's not enough?
Look, sanctions are the measure that we've got to really go hard on the finances that support war and the oligarchs and the kleptocrats that surround Vladimir Putin. But not that alone. You know that there will be an expansion of troops along the eastern flank. The Baltic states hugely concerned now, of course, because of this aggressive posture from Vladimir Putin. And as I said, it's important that we assist in arming Ukrainians as they continue to fight. And they are fighting, they're fighting harder, and that's why Vladimir Putin has not met his objectives in the first 3 days of this struggle. He is behind where he thought he would be.
We spoke to our reporter Lucy Watson, who is in Poland at the moment, and she's with several Ukrainian people who have now found themselves to be refugees. That is going to be felt across Europe because there are hundreds of thousands of people who are now displaced, who are not able to stay at home and to fight. So what is it that you'd like to see perhaps the government here do regarding those refugees?
Well, we have a moral duty to those seeking sanctuary. Just as people fleeing Idi Amin in Uganda, fleeing the conflict in Cyprus, Vietnamese boat people, we opened our arms to those people. The government need a scheme that is not full of restrictions, that's not asking people to demonstrate salary, to demonstrate family ties. Why are they doing that? Why would you ask someone crossing a border from war what their salary levels are? And that's why Yvette Cooper, our Shadow Home Secretary, was very robust with the Home Secretary yesterday. We cannot expect people to jump through the bureaucratic and red tape hoops that she has set to come into our country.
But one would argue that they also have to do that safety-wise. One could argue that we can't have hundreds of thousands of people here because we won't necessarily be able to afford it.
Look, it's absolutely clear the vast majority of those fleeing Ukraine will settle in Hungary and Poland and in the Baltic states. Just as we've seen other countries in the European Union simplifying their systems to allow people to come here, we should do the same. And I've got to say, yesterday, having a Home Office minister suggests that the way through is for people to come as fruit pickers into this country, frankly, was obscene in the face of the conflict that people are facing. You cannot expect people holding their children in their arms, crossing borders, to have to fill in bureaucratic red tape. Yes, there must be a scheme, but it must be a simplified scheme, one that was similar to the one that was set up during the Balkans crisis all those years ago.
OK, David, thank you very much for that. Let's talk to Robert Peston now, who's over at Westminster. And David Lammy there was saying that Labour wants to see more sanctions on the insurance industry and more sanctions to really cut Putin out of the UK's financial system. And the decision regarding SWIFT was taken last night with the US, the UK and the EU. So do we feel as though that's enough for now, or could we go further still?
Well, look, there's more punishment you can impose, but let's be under no illusion. What was imposed late last night by the European Union, the UK, the US, Western economies was much more severe than has ever been imposed on Russia, arguably as severe, if not more severe, than the kind of sanctions that have been imposed on Iran. Now, the risk for Putin, there are reports that we're already seeing signs of this in Russia, is of a run on Russian banks. There are reports today that there are queues already at cash points in Russia when banks open. We may well see Russian citizens desperately trying to get currency out, because what was announced wasn't just a ban on some Russian banks using the SWIFT system. This is that global digital system which allows transfers between banks. Now that deprives banks of vital sources of currency, of cash, of liquidity. We also saw an embargo imposed by the West on the Russian central bank. This was something that Ukraine's President Zelensky has been calling for, and it makes it extremely difficult for Putin to access $650 billion of reserves that he built up at the central bank, which he built up explicitly to try and protect his economy in the event of Western sanctions. The West has now taken action to make it much more difficult to deploy those assets. As I said earlier in the programme, analysts are expecting the ruble to fall sharply when exchanges open. That means that the price of goods for Russian citizens will rise very sharply, almost immediately. There'll be a massive squeeze over the coming days and weeks on the living standards of Russian people. This is genuinely the most significant punishment that the West has so far imposed on Putin since the start of his appalling offensive in Ukraine, and as I say, many would say probably more significant even than the arms and equipment that's been shipped over to Ukraine. Last night, the British Prime Minister Boris Johnson was at Brize Norton seeing off a huge plane of munitions and equipment to Ukraine. That is important. Ukraine's president wants all that equipment, though there are questions about whether or not once the stuff is in the region it can get to where it's needed, particularly against obviously since the Russian forces will be attempting to stop it getting where it's needed. But as far as I'm concerned, the most important thing that's happened are these increased sanctions. And I say the other thing which has happened just very briefly is a task force has also been set up to identify Russian oligarchs' assets and try and sequester, seize them, to deprive Putin of another source of potential funding. So in the round, this is a very significant retaliation by the West.
Okay, Robert, thank you. Good morning. If you're just joining us, it's just gone 8:30 here in the UK and 10:30 in Ukraine. We are on air with a special programme on Ukraine as the country faced a night of heavy bombardment. This hour, Russian President Vladimir Putin has congratulated members of special forces, saying they fought heroically in Ukraine, while the Kremlin insisted it was ready for talks with Kyiv.
Эти мои слова будут обращены.
Ukraine's President Zelensky has also been speaking and said his country is ready for peace talks with Russia, but not in Belarus. Russian troops have entered the country's second city of Kharkiv. There is reported to be fighting in the streets. Okay, let's talk to Lucy Watson now, who's in Poland. That's on the Ukrainian border, as you can see from the map. Lucy, you're seeing simply incredible offers of help and humanity to those fleeing the crisis, aren't you there?
Well, Charlene, we've just received the latest numbers, and there are now around 160,000 people who have made their way across into Poland in the last 3 days. And this is what people meet when they get off these trains from the borders. I mean, you can see this gentleman here, he's got a sign and he is offering to take people to a different location in Poland. Further down this line, these gentlemen here are offering people a ride, a lift to Berlin over in Germany. They've just come out of the goodness of their heart to offer people transportation, a place of refuge. Now, this gentleman here, his name is Andre. We met him a short time ago. Hello, Andre. My name is Lucy. I'm from British Television. Now, he has driven 8 hours overnight from Leipzig in Germany. Why did you decide to come here? When did you decide?
So this is easy to answer. So the decision was just for helping. So it's cold here outside. The people are hungry. They have had some hard hours, I think, and I guess they need a kind of shelter. Yes.
Kindness. They need kindness, don't they?
Yeah.
And what you have already found a family, a group of people that you're taking. They've already found you.
Yes. So I found 3 persons, and well, in about half an hour we will start. And this evening we are back in Leipzig and can drink a coffee or a tea. And well, I hope having a better time than here.
Andre, thank you so much for talking to me and for what you're doing. So as I say, this is the platform that people are arriving in on, and this is a very different situation to when we came here just 2 days ago. It was very busy then, of course, but there are just so many more people now here. Now, these rooms to my right, these are kind of waiting rooms that we're not allowed inside at the moment. That is because they're mainly filled with children. When you go inside, they let me go inside, but they wouldn't let the cameras in. When you go inside, there are storybooks in boxes. There are cuddly toys and things. In this room here, again, we're not allowed in there, but that is where you can see lines and lines of buggies to give you an illustration of just how many children are in fact inside this building. Each one of those buggies has been carrying a child from a very desperate situation over the border here into Poland. And people are giving out food, of course, water, drinks, anything from Polish sausages to nappies, desperate supplies that people need when they get here. They're coming with virtually nothing in some cases. This is an announcement offering people help, and they're chanting their own reasons and offering people help. Here, this gentleman here has got something to keep the cold from the floor for him to be able to sleep. When you walk around this station, when you see people who have got small bowls of soup, these are quite pitiful scenes. You can't quite believe that 2-3 days ago these people were at home in their own kitchens cooking dinner for their families, and now they're desperate for the help of strangers. So this is the main area that we are allowed in. It's not really a waiting room. I suppose it's almost like the main kind of arrivals hall, if you like. So over here is the fire service. These are cadets from the fire service, and they're offering free transport. And they have a list of people who are offering beds for the night. And as you can see here to my left, yet another sign, yet another volunteer, just someone who has decided to come and offer people somewhere to stay. And then when you come over to the right over here, this is where people are getting food. You can just see here, people are getting warm drinks, just here. And these are all volunteers, and these are all operations that have been set up so quickly because it's needed to. There are just so many people coming through. Now, at the moment, this is relatively quiet, but in the next hour or so, we are expecting yet another train to come across from Kiev and another from the border.
Okay, Lucy, thanks very much for that. You just cannot underestimate the power of the kindness of strangers, and that is very much being shown across Poland at the moment. Okay, let's cross now to our US correspondent Emma Murphy, who's in Washington. And Emma, we've heard from both the presidents of Ukraine and Russia this morning. It's quite a fast-paced and fast-moving situation now, isn't it?
Indeed, these were the first comments for the last couple of days from Vladimir Putin. He was praising the operation that he says is underway to protect the people of Donbass, and also to reiterate that Russia are available for peace talks. However, many would see this as a particularly hollow offer, because where they're offering the location to be is Belarus, which is one of the sites that some of the troops that have gone into Ukraine have gone from, and indeed this morning we're getting reports of some shelling coming from there. President Zelensky has said that he will not engage in dialogue in Belarus. Obviously he views that as a very unsafe place to go, because it is seen as a hostile territory. He says he is willing to talk to the Russians, but he wants it to be in a neutral location, potentially Istanbul, Bratislava, Baku, or maybe Warsaw. Now, I think the fact that this diplomatic corridor is still open one way or the other is something that the Americans will welcome. They have been pushing for the past few weeks to try and keep the dialogue between the two nations going, and they are trying to broker it, but it's likely to need to be a more independent nation that is going to have greater success in getting the diplomats to the table at this point. Turkey has offered itself as a go-between if necessary, so there will be discussions going on over the next few hours as to how this potential to try and raise the diplomatic tone once more can be really exploited. The big issue, I suspect, from President Biden's point of view is that now with these sanctions really almost as full on as it's possible to be, where do they go next? How do they really start to exert some influence on President Putin beyond the financial? So there will be a lot of calculations going on in capital cities around the world today to see where they go now they have played their hand on sanctions, and how there is the possibility of bringing some calm to this situation. It certainly doesn't seem like there's an awful lot of optimism about this at this point, but there is still a determination to try and find some form of diplomatic solution in this situation.
Okay, Emma Murphy, thank you very much. Well, back here, it's estimated that there are around 70,000 Ukrainians, British Ukrainians living in the UK, and many who fear for friends and family who are currently in the country. Well, Hannah Miller is at a Ukrainian Catholic church in Manchester. Well, later on this morning, a mass will be held. I think it's around 9 o'clock. And Hannah, it just must be so difficult and so worrying for those who have relatives in Ukraine at the moment.
Yes, Charlene, churches like this across the country will be places for people to gather this morning, collect their thoughts, say a prayer. This one, as you say, is in the heart of Manchester's Ukrainian community. An incredible building, as you can see, and many of the people who are starting to gather here this morning still have family and friends in Ukraine. It is a very worrying time for them. The service will be led this morning by Father Taras Homich. Thank you for having us. How would you describe the mood of Ukrainian people who have friends and family over there living in the UK?
People are worried and angry at what is going on. It's holy anger, because very difficult situation in Ukraine. Tragedy, bloodshed, which needs to be stopped. People are concerned and worried for their family members, for their friends, for their own country. But they are at the same time very determined. Those who live in Ukraine, those who are in diaspora, everyone is determined to defend Ukraine. And we stand together in solidarity with the Ukrainian people.
And you personally have friends and family over there. How are they doing?
My parents live in Lviv, in western part of Ukraine, and my family members also live in neighboring cities. At the moment, they are not directly affected by this war, but nobody in Ukraine is safe at the moment, so I am worried for them. I pray for them, and we need to do everything to stop this bloodshed.
And what do you make of the response from the UK government so far?
I'm delighted to see a very robust and clear response of the UK government. It shows, I think, good example, real leadership in this difficult situation. But obviously the war is escalating, it's developing, and the situation is rapidly changing, so it needs to respond to the new challenges put by the aggressor, and I hope that UK government will act adequately to the situation.
I know, of course, that you're doing as much as you possibly can to support people and gather donations and help people. It will be a very difficult morning for many people as they gather here today, but they are hoping that by supporting each other, they can make this difficult time a little bit better.
Of course, and holding on to their faith. Hannah, thanks very much for that. Let's get a reminder of the unfolding situation currently in Ukraine. In the last hour, Russia's President Putin congratulated members of special forces, saying they fought heroically in Ukraine, while the Kremlin insisted it was ready for talks with Kyiv. Ukraine's President Zelensky has also been speaking and said his country is ready for peace talks with Russia, but not in Belarus. And Russian forces have entered the country's second city of Kharkiv, though it is reported to be fighting on the streets. And earlier, our cameras caught the aftermath of an explosion in Kyiv. OK, let's talk to Colonel Richard Kemp, who's a former British military commander in Afghanistan and former chair of the Cobra Intelligence Group. Thank you so much for talking to us, Colonel Kemp. We've been hearing a lot about the fact that Russian troops have had to slow their progress or have been slowed down in terms of their progression into Kyiv. Would you agree that they perhaps weren't expecting that Putin wasn't expecting the resistance that he's had from Ukraine?
Well, I think Putin has very good military intelligence and would have certainly expected pretty stiff resistance from Ukraine. He knows the Ukrainian army has been well trained, including by British military trainers, and equipped, again, including by British military equipment and American and others. So he knows that it's a much more capable army than it was a few years back. I would be surprised if he was actually genuinely surprised about the speed of the campaign. I don't think he set out on a blitzkrieg operation in which he was going to crush Kiev within a day. I think his tactics are probably to go a bit more slowly and use less ferocity in order to minimize casualties. And I think casualties I'm talking about, particularly Russian casualties. He doesn't want a stream of body bags going back to Moscow any more than is needed in order to maintain as much support as possible among the Russian people. He also, I don't think, wants to inflict unnecessary casualties on the Ukrainians. And when I say unnecessary casualties, of course, the whole war is unnecessary, but any more than he feels he has to, because he knows that he intends to occupy the country if his plans go the way he thinks they will, and he doesn't want to have any greater anger than already exists. So I think we shouldn't underestimate the stiffness of the Ukrainian resistance, but I don't think we should have expected this all to be over within a day or two.
I mean, we've been talking to our security editor, Rohit Kachi, throughout the morning, and he is currently in Kyiv. And about an hour ago, he heard a lot of artillery fire coming down, and he thinks it was perhaps one of the nearest airports to Kyiv. Perhaps that Putin can put more troops on the ground via the airport. Does that sound about right to you?
Yeah, I think that would be something he would aim to do. As well as bringing forces in overland, in tanks, in armoured vehicles, etc. But I think, that ultimately he will want to put in place as many forces as he thinks he needs to take Kiev, and then he will maybe lay siege to the city to try and get the government to surrender. And if not, then I think he will unleash massive brutality on Kiev, and that will result in street fighting, it will result in hand-to-hand combat, and it will result in a huge amount of suffering by the Ukrainian army and the Ukrainian citizens of Kiev.
Colonel, it's Robert Moore here in the studio. I think our viewers fully understand that there's no role for British troops on the ground inside Ukraine. Perhaps even a no-fly zone is a step too far. But I wondered what you think about the idea that Britain, or indeed the United States, should engage in sort of offensive cyber operations, perhaps denying kind of space to Russian armored forces or to aircraft in terms of the electronic area. Do you think we should be engaged in some kind of hybrid warfare in which we're doing offensive cyber operations to slow the assault?
I think we should. I think we should do cyber operations against Putin. He's done them against us in the past. He will probably do them again in the future. We should be willing to do that, either directly or by giving assistance to Ukraine to do so. We should also continue to supply arms to Ukraine, as many as they need, as many as we can get to them, together with our other NATO allies. And we should continue to provide them with intelligence and reconnaissance or surveillance, air surveillance, if we can. Certainly that played a pretty significant role in the build-up to this operation and helped to prepare and inform the world about what was going on on the Ukrainian border and what Putin's intentions were. So, yeah, I think anything we can do that can keep the Ukrainian army fighting, we should do.
In terms of what we are doing as a nation, what the government has decided to do, we of course had those decisions regarding SWIFT overnight, the international banking system. Do you feel that there is any more that our government could be doing to help the Ukrainian people and the Ukrainian army?
I think we should do everything we can to turn Russia into a pariah state and make it very clear that's what's happening and that's what's going to happen, and that will be the permanent status until there's a change of government in Moscow, so that the people understand that, because our objective should be to bring down Putin. That should be what we are aiming to do. Otherwise, we will see continuation of this sort of aggression, and that could include cutting off diplomatic relations with Russia, expelling their ambassador, not just from London, but from all other NATO capitals as well. And also at the same time, I think preparing for if Putin's campaign does succeed in Ukraine, which it seems likely to, then if there is a long-term occupation of part of the country or the whole of it, we should now be preparing to support whatever resistance movement grows up so that Ukraine becomes a quagmire for Putin. I don't want to see any more Russian soldiers killed than need to be killed, but what I do want to do, what I do believe we should be doing is to create such a difficulty in Ukraine for him that it becomes a deterrent against further aggression. He's got his eye on the Baltic states. The last thing we need is for him to send peacekeepers in there that we have to stand up and fight against.
So Colonel, are you then saying that Ukrainians are highly unlikely to win this battle?
I don't know. I think it's hard to see how they will win it. Of course, as I said earlier, they put up very stiff resistance, but they've got a massive force that they're fighting, and you know, I think a lot of people have taken confidence from the fact that this hasn't all suddenly finished and that Putin has raised the Russian flag over Ukraine. I think that surprised people, but that's people who don't really necessarily fully comprehend the speed the time it takes to build up forces in such a large area and the difficulty in doing so. This is not like America going against invading Iraq and fighting the Iraqi army. This is an extremely hardcore, well-trained army in Ukraine. It's a peer army to Russia, not as big, not as many tanks, not as many aircraft, but it's on a level with the Russian army, I would say, in terms of man-for-man capability. So I think some people would have expected too much, two things to happen too quickly. I would hope that Putin doesn't succeed, and I hope that Ukraine manages to drive them out and drive them back. But it's actually quite hard to see that happening at the moment. I hope I'm wrong.
I mean, I think we all hope you're wrong, because we've seen today when we were talking to our reporter Richard Gaisford, you've got civilians who are gearing up to travel to Kiev to protect their city. You've got mothers and grandmothers and women in the city that he was in who are trying to sew and put together gear for their loved ones to strap on and to cover themselves with, to try and protect their city. And from what you're saying, it feels as though all those things and all those sacrifices that so many men are about to start making in Ukraine may well be fruitless.
Well, I don't think they'll be fruitless. I would hope they succeed, but I'm sceptical about whether they will or not. But any person who values freedom, values his way of life, values his independence or her independence, has to fight for it if necessary, or contribute to the fighting effort. It's not just the fighters, it's not just the soldiers, it's all those who support them, who provide food for them, who provide shelter when necessary. All of these different things that are being done in Ukraine today, I don't think that could ever be considered fruitless. I think it will always be seen, whatever happens in Ukraine, it will be seen as a magnificent time for Ukraine, one in which its people stood up against a ruthless aggressor and hopefully did at least severe damage to him to deter, and even more hopefully succeeded in repelling him.
Okay, Colonel Richard Kemp, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Okay, we're joined now by Matthew Morris of the International Committee of the Red Cross. Matthew, there are so many people who are wanting to help. There are so many people that want to do something, especially when the situation is looking so dire in Ukraine. So what is being done currently to help those who are under bombardment and those who are fleeing violence?
Well, it's a very tense and distressing and dangerous situation for the men, women and children in Ukraine. We are trying to do what we can, but many of our colleagues are having to take shelter. We now know that there is this curfew in the capital until 8 o'clock tomorrow morning, Monday. So that's an added layer of difficulty, and people are facing just an impossible choice. And this is the choice that we see over decades in conflicts. Do they stay in their homes or do they flee, and where do they flee to? So what we are trying to do in different parts of the country is provide, for example, first aid and emergency water supplies, and then at border points as well, where we know people are fleeing to. Other parts of the Red Cross in different countries are also trying to look to help people, to provide emergency supplies, food and water and shelter, mother and baby stations, things like that. So it's very, very difficult, and a lot of our staff are not able to work, but we're trying to do what we can.
Now, I know from being on social media, on Twitter, on Instagram, on Facebook, there are lots of people putting up links to charities, that, including your own, that they could donate to in order to be able to support the effort by so many charities in Ukraine. But in terms of getting aid in and getting help in and being able to distribute food, as you say, it's difficult if there's a curfew as there is in Kiev. So how do you then get around things like that to be helping those who need it most?
Well, this is what I would say, and we're so grateful for people who are bombarding us with offers to support. People can go to the British Red Cross website, redcross.org.uk, to donate to the Ukraine Crisis Appeal. And the aim of that is to get money as quickly as possible to those working for the Red Cross on the ground. There's the ICRC, the International Committee of the Red Cross. We are there across the country, and the Ukrainian Red Cross. They have got over 3,000 staff and volunteers. So the people are there. We have the infrastructure. What we need is the humanitarian space to be able to do our job. This is something that is required in international humanitarian law. You go back to the Geneva Conventions and other bodies of law. All parties to this conflict must obey international humanitarian law. Civilians and civilian infrastructure, so hospitals, schools, power plants, are protected. And what we're particularly concerned about, obviously, the reports and the images of violence and fighting coming into densely populated areas. We've seen year after year in all sorts of parts of the world the devastating consequences of this kind of violence when neighborhoods are turned into front lines. That's devastating. So people can go onto the website provide some funds. We will aim to get that as soon as we can to the teams on the ground who are doing this important work. We will do what we can.
Okay, Matthew Morrison, Red Cross, thank you. Well, good morning. If you're just joining us, it's just gone 9 o'clock here in the UK and 11 o'clock in Ukraine. We are on air with a special programme on Ukraine this morning as the country face a night of heavy bombardment. Russia's President Vladimir Putin has congratulated members of special forces, saying they fought heroically in Ukraine, while the Kremlin insisted it was ready for talks with Kyiv. Ukraine's President Zelensky has also been speaking and said his country is ready for peace talks with Russia, but not in Belarus. And these are the latest pictures coming in from the country's second city of Kharkiv, where Russian troops have entered. There is reported to be fighting on the streets. Meanwhile, ITV News has learned that a number of people who've escaped to Poland from Ukraine, that number has now reached 160,000. Let's now look at the latest live pictures from Kyiv. Our correspondents there telling us that there was a night of heavy shelling and bombardment. In the background, you can see just at the back of the shot there, plumes of smoke from explosion at an oil refinery. But we do know there have also been plumes of smoke seen over Kyiv from bombardment and artillery shots from what we believe to be one of the nearest airports to Kyiv. In the east of the country, though, that's really seeing Russian aggression this morning, as John Ray reports.
Ukraine has vowed to defend every inch of its country. In the second city of Kharkiv this morning, its army is fighting street by street and scoring some victories against the invading Russians in a war Vladimir Putin cannot afford to lose. He sent his special forces into the city's outskirts at first light. 1.5 million people here have been warned to stay home. Overnight, as Russian tanks advanced under cover of darkness, the Kremlin offered peace talks. It can be little surprise they have been rejected by Ukraine. President Zelensky said Putin's actions bore the signs of genocide. All this follows another night of torment and another night of terror. A fuel depot ablaze to the south of Kyiv. But Russian aggression is met by defiance. In this social media post, the local mayor says the enemy wants to destroy everything, but it will achieve nothing. God is with us. The West has agreed its toughest sanctions yet to exclude some, though not all, Russian banks from the SWIFT financial system.
We are resolved to continue imposing massive costs on Russia. Costs that will further isolate Russia from the international financial system and our economies.
The Ukrainian military is reinforced by a citizens' army. With great bravery, some place themselves in the path of Russian tanks, while in the eastern city of Sumy, a petrol bomb was hurled at a Russian convoy. And though there will be no NATO troops on the ground, these missiles are made in the UK and are now seen in the hands of Ukrainian soldiers.
The horror of what is unfolding in Ukraine is becoming clear to Western audiences, and that is in turn putting huge pressure on Western politicians. We've got to act together, and we've got to do more.
As Russia's assault intensifies, so its international isolation deepens. Last week, Donald Trump flattered Putin. Last night, he praised the Ukrainian president.
He's a brave man. He's hanging in. He's a brave man.
Prince Harry has added his voice to the wave of revulsion at Russian aggression.
Before I begin, we would like to acknowledge the people of Ukraine who urgently need our continued support as a global community.
The UN says at least 240 civilians have been killed or injured. In Kyiv, under curfew, another night in the metro station, and they woke to the sounds of air raid sirens, a menacing omen for the day ahead. John Ray, ITV News.
Okay, let's bring you up to speed with what's happening across the country. Ukrainian authorities say that Russian troops have entered Ukraine's second largest city of Kharkiv, and fighting is underway in the streets after Russian forces blew up a gas pipeline in Kharkiv, prompting the government to warn people to protect themselves from the smoke by covering their windows. Overnight, huge explosions lit up the sky south of the capital, Kyiv, where people hunkered down in homes, underground garages and subway stations in anticipation of a full-scale assault by Russian forces. And flames billowed into the air before dawn from an oil depot near the Zuliani airport, about 25 miles, that's 40 kilometres, south of the capital. OK, we're joined once more from Kyiv by our global security editor, Rohit Kachur. About an hour ago, you were saying that you could hear firing, you could hear some bombardment. How's it been over the last hour? How are things looking?
Well, what we heard was several explosions in the distance. I think you can pick it up on the other camera that we have actually, and what we, simply from looking at a map, where we believe that was happening was somewhere close to Hostomel airfield, which has been a focus of a lot of the fighting over the past few days. There is an airfield there. We know that part of the Russian strategy was to take it so that they could land more troops, more reinforcements, more equipment there as part of their what may well have been their final battle, their final assault on the capital, Kyiv. What we know is that over the past few days, it has changed hands, switching from the Russians to the Ukrainians, and that explosion was vaguely in the area of Hostomel and another suburb nearby called Bucha, which we know there has been, which has been the location of some heavy firing this morning. We've seen claims, reports on social media about a bridge perhaps being struck, maybe by the Russians, perhaps brought down deliberately by the Ukrainians, but certainly some activity over there. And so we've seen across the skyline several explosions this morning after a fairly dark night, in which we saw a little further away at an oil depot close to a military facility, these huge plumes of pulsating red smoke after these very loud explosions early in the day, which were followed by air raid sirens here in the city, people rushing to their bunkers if they had one, people sleeping in the subway, the metro stations. But as it stands now, the Ukrainian military still hold this city and they're still resisting.
OK, Rohit, thank you. Let's turn now to our political editor, Robert Peston, who's over at Westminster. Robert, we've been talking about new sanctions against Russian financial systems. What will the consequences be for us here of these sanctions?
Well, they will impose costs on the West, on Europe, on the US, and indeed on the UK. And the reason for that is because there are plenty of Western businesses that will be shut out of trading with Russia. That will bring costs to those businesses. There are plenty of Western businesses owed money by Russia. They won't be able to get that money. And then there is the biggest potential cost to the West, which is a disruption to the flow of gas and oil products into Europe in particular. Now, economies, huge economies like Germany and Italy get about 40% of their gas requirements from Russia. In these sanctions that are being imposed on Russian banks, excluding them from the so-called SWIFT system, which makes it almost impossible for Russian banks to pay for Western goods and services and for Western businesses to get money out of Russia, there is an attempt by the authorities in the West to sort of carve out oil and gas business, to allow oil and gas to continue to flow to Europe. But I have to say, I think this will prove very, very difficult, because you're basically relying on banks to identify, Western banks to identify what is sort of legitimate business with Moscow and what is banned business. And in practice, I think that will mean there will be disruption. We'll see further rises in the oil and gas price in coming days. Now, as we all know, there is a massive cost of living squeeze already in the UK and indeed all throughout the Western world as a result of surging oil and gas prices, and that is going to get worse. So although, as I've been saying throughout the programme, the sanctions that have been announced will really hit the Russian economy hard, it is the sort of financial equivalent of shock and awe. I'm afraid here in the West, in order to punish Russia, we are going to have to endure quite a lot of pain, economic pain, cost to our living standards.
Robert, thank you. Well, let's go straight to Foreign Secretary Liz Truss. We've been hearing there from Robert the talk of sanctions, and the changes regarding SWIFT, of course, came in overnight. Do you feel like that's enough for now?
Well, we have put in place the toughest package of sanctions that we've ever had on Russia in response to this appalling invasion. And the purpose is to degrade the Russian economy over time, to stop Vladimir Putin being able to fund his war machine. But of course, we're also supplying defensive weaponry into Ukraine to support them in their struggle against the Russian forces. And we need to do both of those things. This is going to be a long-term struggle. This could go on for a number of years. But what's vitally important is we do use our sanctions to degrade the ability of Russia to raise money on the international markets, to stop it gaining so much revenue from oil and gas, but also to stop it getting the technology it needs to try and improve its military machine.
But one would assume, though, that Putin had factored in the fact that we would lay sanctions on him and on Russia. So what if these tough sanctions? They are tough, but what if he doesn't care? What if he just carries on? Are you happy with a war that perhaps, as you said in one of the papers this morning, a war that could go on for a decade?
Well, I believe that Putin didn't expect the toughness of the sanctions we put in place. I don't think he expected the West to be so united. He likes to try and play a game of divide and rule, and we're now seeing the Germans send defensive weapons to Ukraine. The UK was the first country in Europe to do that, but we're seeing all of our allies following suit, and we're seeing strong resolve against Russia. Nobody supported Russia at the United Nations Security Council, so I don't think Putin expected the unity and strength, and I don't think he expected the severity of the sanctions. I also don't think he expected the Ukrainians to fight so hard, because they are fighting for their country, they're fighting for freedom and democracy, and they've shown huge bravery. We warned Putin before he started this, that starting this war would be a massive strategic mistake that could lead to the end of his regime. And what we're now seeing is unprecedented unity in standing up to Putin.
But should we have foreseen that this was going to happen? Should we have been doing more before last week Thursday when the incursion actually started?
Well, we were already helping the Ukrainian army. We've trained up 20,000 Ukrainian troops. We were supplying defensive weapons into Ukraine, and we were providing economic support to Ukraine as well. You know, we were clear, and the entire West were clear, that if there was an invasion, that there would be severe costs. We're now putting those severe costs in place. But this war is Putin's, and Putin's war alone. He has started, he's carried out this incursion, and this is why we are now responding with the severest possible sanctions.
Foreign Secretary, it's Robert Moore here in the studio. You've talked about providing defensive weapons to Ukraine. Is there a role for us playing in terms of hybrid warfare? Would you rule out using offensive cyber warfare in an attack to slow down the Russian assault on cities?
Unfortunately, if we can have a... Can you hear us now, Liz? Liz Truss, I can,
yeah, sorry.
Oh, you can hear. We'll go back to Robert.
Yeah, my earpiece fell out.
It's Foreign Secretary, it's Robert Moore here in the studio. You've spoken about providing defensive weapons. I wondered if we as a country are thinking about a hybrid warfare. For example, would we ever engage in offensive cyber operations to try and slow down the assault of Russian armoured columns and air attacks on Ukrainian cities? Is a sort of hybrid warfare option even a possibility for the UK?
We have already been supplying strong support to Ukraine in areas like information, communications, challenging the Russian disinformation. We have unleashed some of our intelligence, for example, the attempts by Russia to set up a puppet government in Kiev, the disinformation they're spreading about various so-called false flag operations around Ukraine. So we are supporting the Ukrainians in every way we can, including using our advanced technology.
Let's talk about the refugee crisis, Liz Truss, because we have had our reporter Lucy Watson in Poland at the moment, and I think there's about 160,000 Ukrainians have crossed over the border into Poland, desperately seeking help, desperately trying to get a bed for the night, desperately trying to find food, desperately trying to eat, desperately trying to explain to their children what is currently happening. Poland and those countries cannot solely deal with that. They cannot shoulder full responsibility for all of that. So what is it that we are planning to do?
So we're working very closely with Poland and other allies on the border of Ukraine, helping them with that emergency assistance. We're putting humanitarian aid in. We're supporting with logistics. We've sent our development experts, humanitarian experts to Poland to support. We're also working with the UN to make sure that we protect humanitarian corridors into Ukraine. So we are doing all we can to support the refugees, and you're absolutely right, this is a humanitarian disaster as well as a huge military problem.
So are we opening our doors in that case, or are we just expecting other countries to do that?
Well, the Prime Minister has been very clear that there will always be a home in Britain for refugees. We are very concerned about what's happening on the ground, and we're urgently looking at what more the United Kingdom can do.
Well, it'll be interesting to see how long that takes, Liz Truss, because currently we have children lying on floors in train stations who could really do with knowing where it is they're going to be sleeping in the next couple of nights. Liz Truss, thank you very much. OK, let's return now to our political editor, Robert Peston, in Westminster. What is your reaction, Robert, to what Liz Truss has to say?
Well, so a number of striking things. I thought the most important was the way that the Foreign Secretary made clear they're not expecting regime change, the ousting of Putin and his cronies anytime soon. We are preparing for years of conflict with Putin in and around Ukraine. Now, it's not to say that there won't be more popular pressure on him, especially as a result of these very dramatic sanctions, this financial punishment that's being imposed and has been imposed over just the last few days. But, you know, she is talking about a long and grinding conflict. A couple of other things I just thought were worth picking up on. She said there was unanimity in the UN Security Council against Putin. That is not quite right. It was very striking that China, India and indeed the United Arab Emirates all abstained on the vote condemning what Putin has done in Ukraine. And what that tells us is that to an extent the way that Putin will try and ease the financial pressures that we have imposed on him through these sanctions is to turn in particular to China to help. And I have to say the intelligence experts I talk to do expect China, probably rather quietly but nonetheless in size, to provide the kind of financial needs that Putin now requires. It won't happen quickly, but there will. But as I say, he will receive a degree of protection there. China will extract a price and you know, will expect in a sense to be the boss in this relationship. Putin may not like that, but he doesn't really have any choice. And so I think the other thing that we've all got to be focused on at the moment in respect of this appalling war in Ukraine is the way that it is reshaping the balance of power within the world. And you know, one of the, I'm afraid, fearful consequences of all of this is we are going to resume to a very split world between, to an extent, a West which is now more united than it was, but has not been as coordinated in terms of acting together as it was during the Cold War, and that we've got to learn lessons from that, and a sort of Chinese-Russian axis. So, fearful long-term consequences from all of this.
OK, Robert, thank you very much. I'm not sure we ever seem to learn from history. Let's go back to Richard Gaisford, who's in Western Ukraine, and you've been talking to people there who are scared about what will happen over the next few days, weeks or years, even if Liz Truss's predictions comes true.
Yeah, it's a really frightening situation for so many people. Hundreds coming through to this refugee centre and more people bringing bedding and other goods, clothes, food for those refugees who are using this as something of a staging post. You can see the sandbags that have been piled up outside, Charlene. That is because they are frightened of an attack here, but they're not allowing that nervousness to stop them from helping those people who have been fleeing from the Russian forces. Well, let's get the camera, Rav, inside. It is incredibly busy here now at this refugee centre. This is the lobby of what was normally the cinema. Now, up on the wall here, you can see this poster of the Ukrainian army. And it says unbreakable, and this army is unbreakable because of the support it gets. Let's have a listen and a look at what's happening over here. This lady is singing patriotic songs as other women here from the community take strips of camouflage material and put it onto this netting, and they're going to give it to the soldiers to take up towards Kiev so they can start that fight back against the Russian forces. It is incredibly difficult to move through. We're going to start pushing our way through the crowds here. You can see them ripping up these bits of camouflage material here to put onto this netting. They just want to give the soldiers every single fighting chance they can. And some of the soldiers were here this morning. They were given a breakfast. They're volunteers who've signed up to go up to Kiev and to fight the Russians. We come through into what is the main hall of the cinema here. A little quieter. You can see these old-fashioned cinema projectors here. We've spoken to the projectionist who says that he's been here 50 years, he's never seen anything like this. And in this slightly calmer environment, they are working through the names of the people that are coming here. They're trying to keep everyone together so they know where everyone is coming from, where everyone is heading. And if we come forward just through, I'm hoping that we can just show you inside the cinema auditorium again, because as more goods comes through, it's okay. There's no child, there's just goods that the people are bringing. We'll just work our way through here. You can see the large stocks of food that they've been gathering here for these refugees, and an amazing enterprise inside what is the theatre auditorium. If Rav just follows me in, you can see these huge teams of people, all of the volunteers who've come together from the community, and they are working together to take and sort the clothes, the bedding that has been given to help those refugees. They expect to see thousands coming through in the coming days. You can see it all piled up here. The moment it's being funded by the local churches, the city hall has given them some money, but it is clear that that international aid is going to be really needed in places like this to help those who have fled from the fighting with absolutely nothing. Charlene.
Richard Gaisford, thank you so much. Look, we're going to talk now to Katerina Obachenko, who's a resident of Kiev. Catherine, you've had your first night under curfew, and I know it's a scary situation that you're in at the moment. What's it been like for you so far this morning?
It was loud. It was still like 10 minutes ago when your people called me. I was not sure if I would be able to do the interview because of the shellings and the explosions we heard very close to us.
And it's quite difficult, I think, for a lot of us to get our heads around. Last weekend was a very normal weekend by all accounts, and this week you're having to contend with shellings and bombardment and artillery shots fired. You know, this change in your life, what is it like for you?
I'm not sure we can actually still comprehend what is going on. It's like, you know, when we see it in a shelter during the night, and then somebody is just like, can you imagine we are talking about the war and that we are being shot like now? Like every second whilst we are in Kiev, it's not like maybe in some parts of Ukraine, which are fortunate enough, but in Kiev, it's like every second, every minute, the situation can be changed. And the city we love so much is just under attack of this crazy ideas. It's insane. It's insane, and I think I had kind of like panic attack like this night because it came to me that it hit me as this realization that this is it. Like there's a real possibility, like not to be able to open your eyes again tomorrow.
Oh, Katerina, look, please just be safe. And please just go inside and please stay underground and please, honestly, try and be as safe as you can. But we do appreciate you talking to us this morning. Thank you, Katerina. Robert, a lot has happened this morning. We've had our correspondents who have been seeing the bombardment in Kyiv, who've witnessed it. What happens now?
I think the big takeaway is what the Foreign Secretary warned you on this programme, is that the world needs to be braced not for weeks or months of conflict in the heart of Europe, but actually years. And with that comes instability, not just on the Ukrainian-Russian axis, but also in the Baltics, in the Caucasus, in Central Asia, because, you know, if we have in the Kremlin a leader who wants to try and reinvent the sort of imperialist notions of Russia and the former Soviet Union, then that is a world of uncertainty and of pain. The truth is, Charlene, we don't have a sense of the decision-making in the Kremlin. It appears to be seriously paranoid. You know, he has succeeded so far, President Putin has, in uniting NATO and the Ukraine. He's inflicted potentially huge damage on his own economy. Russia remains isolated. You know, the Putin brand is irreversibly and irretrievably damaged. It appears that it's a completely inexplicable war at this point.
Okay, Robert, thank you. Well, we will be back with bulletins throughout the day, but that is it from us after a special programme this morning. Let's take a final look at the streets of Kyiv. They're quiet because of that 39-hour curfew, meaning that people are staying in their homes, finding safety and shelter where they can. But in the distance, as you can see in this shot, there is that reminder of war in the beauty of that city. Plumes of smoke still billowing into the sky. It is in Ukraine's second largest city, Kharkiv, that has this morning borne the brunt of Russian aggression. Putin has said he is proud of his troops, but Ukraine forces and civilians continue to stand their ground. There are mass casualties, hundreds feared dead, and there are many, many more victims who fled their homes with their lives with no idea what their future holds. For all of us at home, our teams in Poland, Russia and US, and of course Ukraine, goodbye.